And now here's a very interesting thing that when I first read this, I thought, wow, this is fascinating. So everything's going down, down, down. You could summarize marriage rates in the last 4 decades with one word: decline, with one exception. Here are college-educated women. So they go down until about 1990, and then they actually increase a little bit. So college-educated women, they're getting married later, but they're getting married still at very high rates. So there must be something those college-educated women know, because their kids do way better than other kids. Now, there are lots of reasons, but still, they form stable families, and they do a lot. We have good studies on this. They do a lot with their kids. They spend a lot of time with them. They use a lot of language with them. They kind of stretch their minds. They put them in situations where they can learn. So they do a lot to help their children. And it takes money to do that, and it works a lot better if you have 2 people in a household that are sharing the work. And men who used to be totally worthless in the house, my dad, I never saw him with a dish towel in his hand in 20 years I lived with him. He once in a while he'd mow the lawn, but my mom had to nag him quite a bit to get him to do that. That's changed. A lot of men have responded the way they should, women entering the labor force and contributing a very substantial part of family income, and men are doing better. Women still do more work around the house than men do, but men are getting better. So this sharing these duties, especially with the kids, is one of the benefits of a 2-parent family, and as you can see, it's only college-educated women who seem to realize that and can achieve that kind of lifestyle. And then, of course, you might guess that with marriage rates declining and the popularity of sex not declining, you could have some problems. And so we have more and more of our kids who are born outside marriage. It's true with blacks. Again, they lead the way, but the rates are even higher now for Hispanics, and the increase is higher for Hispanics than for whites. Maybe soon we'll all be the same, and now 7 out of 10 black children are born outside marriage, and only 4 out of 10 of all American children. But look back here the way it was. Whoop, what did I do? I went the wrong way. There we go. So this is a huge part of our problem, and we are creating these single-parent families. And look, we now have a lot of research that shows that kids that are reared in female-headed families and single-parent families do worse in almost every way than kids from married couple families, when you control for everything you possibly can. We're never going to have a random assignment experiment, but we've had some things that are fairly close to that, and the kids always do better. There are other factors involved, of course, but marriage is really a key, and the kids that do the worst are the kids from the non-marital births, like the families that Kathy was talking about from the Fragile Family Study. Here it is by education level. Again, you can see that the more education, less likely women are to enter this condition, although the rates are going up quite a bit here, even for people who have high school degrees and some college experience. And so the result is that we now have 40%, actually with a little bit higher births to unmarried women. Now, Kathy made the point about the lack of stability in cohabiting couples. I often at this point say in my talks that cohabitation is the 5th horseman of the apocalypse. But then I found out that there are a lot of students who are cohabiting, and maybe some of you are, and some of them would always come afterwards. And one time I remember a young lady yelled at me about what a moralistic old bat I was. I reminded her of her father. So I won't say it's the 5th horseman of the apocalypse. But look at it from the perspective of a child. If they're married at birth, at 5 years, only 13% are separated. If they're cohabiting at birth, 40% are separated. That is a really, really big difference. And when you translate that into human terms for little babies, those cute little babies that young man that Kathy told us about loved so much, but he didn't love enough to live with a mother, or left her eventually, and I more or less agree with Kathy's story, but I just think that fathers do not realize they don't execute their responsibility. They say they want to, they say all the right things. It hurts them that they don't, but they don't. And in fact, in her last book, she introduces the idea, which to me is quite shocking, which is that a lot of these young men say that they don't have financial responsibility for the father. That's the mother's job to figure out the finances. Their job is to play with the kid and to spend time with him. Isn't it? So, I mean, that is completely against American values. We spend over $2 billion a year setting up a program called Child Support Enforcement, where we pursue fathers relentlessly. It's one of the most effective government programs. We can find them almost anywhere. We can expropriate their property. We can deduct money directly from their paycheck, and they can't do anything about it, just like we do about taxes. That's how strongly the public sentiment is that fathers are financially responsible for their children. Kathy's point is they're also socially responsible. They ought to have a relationship with their kid. And we have all kinds of new evidence now that this is a big part of the problem that young black males have. Their work rate is down around under 45% now. They're very likely to go to prison. They face lots of disadvantages. I don't want to say one thing is a difference, but not having a father figure consistently in their life is a very big part of the problem, and research is very consistent on that point. I'm going to skip that one. So at any given moment, a quarter of our children almost live with single parents, and over the course of their childhood, it's well over 40%, could be as many as a half. It's harder to trace that number. So this is just a huge problem that keeps growing and growing and growing. And, you know, if you're just a politician, you might think of this, boy, this is having an impact on our GNP. These kids are missing education, they're committing crimes, they cost a lot more public dollars. We could do a lot better if these kids were reared better and look like kids who are from married couple families. And we would save public dollars, but it would also make a huge difference to them and then in the next generation to their children. So all these forces are moving in the wrong direction in family composition, and we are paying a price for it as a nation, and the kids are paying a price for it above all. One reason is that their poverty rates are so huge. So this is very simple to see. Here's the poverty rate for female-headed families. Here's the poverty rate for kids in two-parent families. Some years 5 or 6 times as likely to be poor. So if you're born in a single-parent family, so born outside marriage, you're 5 times as likely to be poor, and nobody thinks poor is good for child development. And here is how much the revolution that I've called in family composition has affected our families. Here you see in 1970, the percentage of women who at age 35, when they're underway, were living with a husband and children. And that has declined consistently, and every other family form has increased. Again, moving in the wrong direction. Now, I will be honest with you and say, and I bet Kathy agrees with this, we don't know much about how to solve this problem. We don't have public policies that are very effective. We do have good policies for reducing teen pregnancy. We've reduced teen pregnancy every year since 1991 except 2 years. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with public policy. We spend a lot of money working with kids. And interestingly, one of the best ways to do it is not to teach them abstinence or to teach them family planning. It's to involve them in positive community-based activities, tutoring and other activities. Kids that are involved in that kind of thing do better, are less likely to get pregnant than kids who are not involved in that kind of thing. And in at least a couple of these, it's not a selection effect. It's not that different kind of kids go into programs because they're randomly assigned. So the kids that have these constructive experiences reminds me of the career academies where the kids are spending time in a work setting, relating with adults, having a positive experience, learning the kind of skills they need. These are the kind of things that our kids need, but we have not figured out a way to do that on a broad enough scale yet. But teen pregnancy programs are hopeful. 20-somethings, 30-somethings, a lot of sex, less marriage, more out-of-wedlock birth. That's the way things are going. It's going to be very hard to turn it around. Our programs are not nearly as successful, though we do have some small-scale programs. I'll give you one example. If Medicaid covered, there's a layer of women just above the Medicaid eligibility. So go $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000 in income above the Medicaid eligibility, and say to those women, hey, you can have family planning services for free. Come to this clinic. And they have counseling and so forth, but they distribute birth control. And that has been shown to actually reduce, it doesn't do anything to reduce the women's sexual activity, but it does reduce, it increases their likelihood of using birth control and decreases their pregnancy rates, and you'd think Republicans would find this attractive, it reduces their abortion rates. So if we had more widespread use of effective means of birth control, we would have both fewer non-marital births and all the problems that that entails, and we would have fewer abortions, something for both sides. So you'd think we'd spend as much as a lot more on these programs than we do. These are all possibilities. All of them, we have some research, but I would say in a word, it's not encouraging, 2 words. And fighting poverty among single mothers and children. Here we've been much more successful. I think this policy is extremely important. And I think the reason that Kathy turned around and many liberals turned around on welfare reform was because so many of these families, in fact, were better off. Listen to this. After welfare reform passed, we had work requirements, and they were not friendly. If you did not follow the state requirements and look for work and try to prepare for work, they reduced your welfare benefits, and in many cases, they took them away. That's why that down there at the bottom, the deep poverty that Kathy showed you about. But get this, never married mothers, the most disadvantaged group in the country, the most likely to be poor, the least likely to have a high school degree, 40% increase in employment in 4 years. There is nothing like that in the history of Bureau of Labor Statistics records. It was an enormous performance. It's exactly what the American public expected, and they did it. And as a result, they got that EITC. We later made changes in food stamps. We did a lot of things to make sure that these families could get benefits so that they would escape poverty. They couldn't escape poverty just on their wages. So that is a very positive story, and we need to keep that up. We need not to cut these programs. In fact, I think we perfect them a lot, and we should help these mothers more with child care. Only a small percentage, I guess it probably is around 20 or 30% of single moms who are eligible for daycare subsidies actually get them, because Congress does not appropriate enough money. It's a first-come, first-served program. That is a way that we could really have a big impact. At least 15% of a low-income families with a working family head is spent on child care. And so that would be a big help if they could get a child care subsidy like other families do, plus it's an outrageous inequity. All right, work is the last one, and I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about welfare reform. But first, let's start with the actual data. A national problem, I got to get over this habit. This is male work rate, and guess what? We have a problem with males in the United States. Males have been going backwards for at least 2 or 3 decades on education and on labor force and in many other ways. So no one is really explaining it. Same thing's true in Europe. Men are less likely to work. And women, as you can see here, are more likely to work and are carrying more of the burden of supporting our children. So that is a problem that nobody really has a good answer of how to deal with. So women is a positive story, and men is not such a positive story for work as a way to reduce welfare and to reduce poverty. Here is a trend in hourly wages. This is a reflection on our economy, and these are really alarming data. Look at this. This is at the 10th percentile, and a lot of you probably don't know this, but we're always going to have 10% of the people at the 10th percentile or below. So if you look at the 10th percentile and see what the average wage is, it declines year after year, it comes back, and after 3 decades, it's right where we started. This is no way to fight poverty because the people that are poor are likely to qualify for jobs that are low wages. So that wages are really a big problem. By the way, that's one of the reasons EITC is such an important program, because it, in a way, makes up for low wages. And it's a better way, I think, to supplement people's income than to try to get employers to pay higher wages because they won't hire as many people. And as you can see there, the wages have done better elsewhere in the distribution, although I have to say that the middle class is doing a little better, but in the past, the rate of increase up until roughly the 60s or 70s was much better than it is now. Again, it's a reflection on the kind of economy we have. And then would work reduce poverty. So Kathy already showed you this chart. This shows this is the welfare rolls. Here's where the welfare reform bill passed, and the welfare rolls plummeted. And look at this. This is the data I told you about, a huge increase. These are never married mothers and employment by never married mothers. And look what happened to poverty. This is poverty for black kids, the red one, and for kids in female-headed families, the black triangles, and as you can see, it plummeted at the same time that the mothers' work increased. Now, isn't that a shock? I don't think there's much stronger evidence that if we could increase work rates, even at what people refer to as crummy hamburger flipping jobs, we would have a big impact on child poverty. So increasing work rates is really an important part of what we need to be doing. And welfare reform showed that. This is the chart that I showed you in the beginning, except now we have new bar graphs. This part of it is new. Here is what happened in 1989 before welfare reform. At that time, almost half the people were in poverty. Life in the state of nature was even worse than it was in 2000 and in 2006. In 2000, 36.7% poverty based on people's own efforts. So a huge increase, and that's because of that big increase in work. And back in '89, you got a nice bump when you include the social insurance programs, but almost no impact of the EITC. And the reason there's almost no impact is because a relatively low proportion of the low-income people worked. And now we get a big bump from both the social insurance programs and EITC. Here it works even after the recession of 2001 when work rates are down some and the poverty rate's back up. We still get a lot of poverty reduction, and in fact we get even more poverty reduction here than we did here, as you can see on this side. So this strategy of work by low-income families and supplementing work with EITC and other benefits is really important, and that's part of what we need to do. We don't have time to talk about this now, but I just want to mention something called sexual employment. I raved on about employment training a little while ago. Here's an example. These are programs that were conducted in 3 sites, and they have training between 2 and 22 weeks, mostly high school dropouts and people with a high school degree, and they were training for jobs that are available in the local economy, often with apprenticeships, and a huge impact. Look at this. Here is the impact on the hours worked. So here's the control group, this random assignment, and here's the experimental group. So when they were training, they worked less. That makes sense. They're in training. And then they start working more, and as a result of that, they earn a lot more money than they did than they would have if they hadn't gone to the training. This, again, is gold standard research. So we can do it. We could do a lot more with our employment and training programs if we can do it right. And let me close with this. I've emphasized government programs, maybe too much. From time to time, I mention individual decisions. This is some work we've done. Again, this is correlational work. We've repeated this several times at the Brookings Institution. And what we show is what would happen if Americans, if children, especially adolescents, young adults, followed 3 really complex rules. Rule 1, complete high school. Rule 2, work full-time. And Rule 3, wait till you're 21 and married before you have a baby. What impact would that have on the poverty rates and on the probability of joining the middle class, defined roughly as 50,000 or more per year? And the answer is, here, if you don't follow any of these norms, this is a description of what's actually out there in the American economy now. 77% of people didn't follow any norms, live in poverty, and only 4% made the middle class, defined as 300% of poverty or more. If you follow all 3, this 77% declines to 2%, and this 4% increases to 72%. Now, let me just say as a footnote here, this is correlational work. It's not random assignment, not gold standard. There are all kinds of issues here, which I'll be happy to discuss. But I think the general picture is correct. And the general picture is that individual decisions that our young people make have a major impact on opportunity, on inequality, and on poverty rates in the country. Kids are making bad decisions. They don't study, they drop out of school, they don't work enough, they have babies outside marriage, and when you add those things up, it has a huge impact on the society and a huge impact on government spending. So personal responsibility has a huge role to play here. If we can learn to help people be more responsible, especially young people, and at the same time improve our government programs, we could do even more than we're doing now to reduce poverty and to increase equality in the United States. Thank you.